Hey, Crystal, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. I am a professor of English at Middle Georgia State University. My background actually as an undergraduate was in theater. And so that's when I first started getting into character analysis. And I knew I was an English nerd because I was the only one of the theater majors who just loved her English classes too. I went on to the University of Alabama and got a master's degree in communication. I worked with competitive speech and drama. And then I went to Winthrop to study English and got my master's in English. And then I did my PhD work at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. And there I really got more involved in creative writing. I had taken classes over the years, but I really started getting involved in it. The community was very supportive of just, you're not a writer. No, everybody's a writer. And so that was my first kind of exposure to a writing community. We did some one act theater. We did a lot of like found poetry events and things like that. And then I came to uh, Georgia in 2003 to teach at Middle Georgia, and I have been there ever since.
I
So
think a
that's
lot of writers identify with that. I'm not a writer, am I a writer? So I
right.
I, I love that. That's one of the things that I've had to learn too. So I love that you kind of discovered that as well.
Yes, yes, yes. Because especially when you're working in graduate school, you can be an academic writer, but you can't be a creative writer. And one of the things that Louisiana was so good at is they had a very friendly program for the creative writers. So a lot of my friends were doing master work, MFAs. There was a PhD in creative writing, and while I wasn't taking those formal classes, I was in that environment, and it was wonderful. It showed the importance of research and rigor with the creative, and I thought that was just wonderful.
Nice. So you teach English at Middle Georgia State University. I'm curious, what reading assignments has really like piqued your, or writing assignments has really piqued your students, got them excited for what they were doing and really got them drawn in?
Oh, that's funny. I've been thinking about that a lot. We just finished reading Bartleby the Scrivener, and it's a short story, or really a novella by Herman Melville. And it is about an office worker who decides not to do his work anymore. He's working in a law office. And of course, the famous phrase in that is he says, I prefer not to, when he's asked to do work. So my students have been getting a kick out of, discussions in class and then saying, I prefer not to. But um, they've been having fun. They've been doing debates in class where they have a mock trial where they kind of put the lawyer on trial. Was he responsible for Bartleby or not? And that's really piqued their interest, to show them that literature is something to think about, great philosophical issues, but it's also something that they can identify with, like working issues in today's climate and the economy and workers' rights, but also shows like The Office. They say that Bartleby's boss was like Michael Scott, so they've been having fun with that. And it is, again, it's a good opportunity to show them how research helps them. So they can't just claim anything in the case. They have to say, well, was that actually a law at that time, and do the research. And some of them are really interested in exploring creative projects. My honors class actually uses Bartleby. They have an option to rewrite the story or part of the story, maybe from a different character's point of view. And again, they find they have to actually do some research with that. So I would have to say Bartleby, and always Edgar Allan Poe. Always Poe.
I love that. And I love that they latched onto the I prefer not to.
Yeah.
I feel like
They're always like,
I
I
feel
prefer
that.
not. I was like, I do too, actually, some days.
So it sounds like, were you really interested in writing before you really got into education? Kind of where did that spark happen for you?
Well, I guess like a lot of writers, I had a vivid kid imagination. So play pretend. I was an only child. And so a lot of times I had to entertain myself. My parents are both great storytellers. My mother read to me Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Wind in the Willows. And my dad was really good at making up stories. Like he would take characters like Darth Vader and Archie and just like mash them together in one great story, and just that would be like a bedtime story that he just made up. And he was really good at cliffhangers. And then in high school, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and that was a great introduction to collaborative storytelling and creating a character with motivations, and then acting, of course. I did a lot of acting in high school and college and after college. So all of that sort of kept informing me about character and story and plot, and how stories are just such an important part of people's lives, maybe even in ways they don't imagine. They certainly have always been important to me. So I guess in a way I've been writing my whole life, and I was making up little stories too. I love to like entertain myself writing little stories when I was a kid. So
So
that
tell us
my
about some
journey.
of those stories. Maybe not the ones from you're a kid if you don't remember all of those, but I know that you have contributed to some anthologies and things like that. So tell us a little bit about what you've written.
Well, when I was a kid, I guess around middle school, I discovered Anne Rice. So I was already gothy because I was reading Edgar Allan Poe, like in um, elementary school. My mom gave me a children's book that was like the Whitman's children's book of Edgar Allan Poe stories, and they weren't rewritten for children; they were just the Poe stories. So the '70s were crazy that way, and yeah, here, take this child story about somebody being murdered. But
Very, very kid-friendly stuff.
very kid-friendly stuff, right, right. And so that kind of reading was really inspiring to me. And then I wanted to be Anne Rice for a while after discovering Anne Rice. So I would write stories about vampires and angsty poetry about vampires, and really lots of stories about vampires. But
So I guess that's how you got into the horror anthology stuff.
yes, yes, I've always liked horror. I've always liked creepy stories. What I guess would now be on the Turner Classic Movie Channel, those Vincent um, Price movies,
Oh, those are wonderful.
Hammer horror, right? I love those. So that kind of inspired me to really embrace horror, and of course Stephen King. And then later I discovered Shirley Jackson and writers like Flannery O'Connor or William Faulkner that people don't think of as horror writers, but there's strong horror elements in their work. So that was a long answer.
Um, so the horror genre, the scary story genre, it's pretty wide ranging. It covers a lot of territory. What would you say are your favorite tropes? What are your obviously vampires is something I'm hearing over and over again, but what are some things you really enjoy in the horror genre?
um, I love fantastical out there stories with like vampires and werewolves and ghosts. I love old fashioned British Gothic stories. But I think what really charges me is horror that is somehow situated in the real world. Because I think I might have been in middle school. I think it was sixth or seventh grade. I discovered Carrie at a bookstore. And this was before Stephen King was like a household name. This was just a bestseller that had just gone into paperback. And I was so shocked that here's this scary story about high school teenagers that were like my cousins and people I knew in high school, or what I imagined high school would be like. And yet there's this supernatural element infused in this realistic world. So I really love that. And then I discovered later, like the works of Shirley Jackson, some short stories by Joyce Carol Oates. I just really, I like all kinds of horror, big slasher movie fan. I teach a class in slasher movies and feminism, the whole range of horror I love. But I think for me personally as a writer, I really like horror that's grounded in the real world, that maybe could have an ambiguity to it. Like maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not, maybe it's psychological. I think they call it quiet horror now, like a slow
Okay.
burn. That's kind of what I like. It's horror that sneaks up on you.
Do you have a favorite horror monster?
Oh wow. I would have said Dracula for a while, of course, because vampires. And then the werewolf, because I did some writing a few years ago on female werewolves, because they're really rare actually in horror films. They're there, but they're not as much of a presence. But I think lately the creature from the Black Lagoon is my favorite
Mm,
at the moment, just because he's so sad.
hmm
He's so unique looking, but he's so sad. And I think that's what I like in all my monsters, this kind of the poignancy of the outsider, a little bit of sadness mixed in with the horror.
Yeah, he is a very tragic figure that once you get past kind of that scary, there's so much more going on there. And I kind of like the underlying lessons in that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you've talked a lot about things that have inspired you, these stories, these authors, Poe and Dracula and the creature from the Black Lagoon. Is there any of them in particular that you have that are your go-tos when you're looking for inspiration and you just need to get the juices flowing?
Um, I think it's what I'm trying to write at the moment. I try to find a comp that that not to copy, but to sort of inspire. I'm currently working on a novella. It's a haunted house story, and it's actually been really difficult. I've been really wrestling it with it because we've recently moved into a new house, and so a lot of this having a new house and having weird things happen in our new house is inspirational. But it also, because it's so close to me, it kind of has blocked me a little bit. So I've started rereading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and that has helped a lot in terms of just the way to tell a story from a character's point of view, but also third person limited. And I've also been reading Richard Matheson's Hell House. I'd never read it before, so I picked it up as like another kind of haunted house story. So I think it changes from moment to moment. I don't have one author that's a go-to. It's more like what's close to what I'm working on right now.
So you brought up excuse me, point of view, um, and we're telling it from the characters, but also limited. What do you think for you? And I know it kind of depends on the story. For you, what is the most powerful point of view that you just love to get into?
Actually, second person you stories I love, and I sit back in awe with something like Jay McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City, because it's a whole novel told from second person, and he manages to pull it off, and it's amazing. Um, I love you stories, and I've used them a couple of times for short stories, particularly flash fiction, because I think there's some kind of immediate connection to the reader that's forged when you say to the reader, you do this and you think this while the character's trying to tell his or her story. So I think at the moment that's my favorite, but I couldn't write a whole novel in that. So
I would find that really tricky personally. I think I would find that tricky to write.
it is. So usually it depends on the story, honestly. At the moment it's first person. I've got a story I just finished that's in first person that was a load of fun. And my novella is at the moment first person, but that could change.
Ah, rewrites and edits.
Oh my gosh, it's forever.
And at some point you've got to just say it's done. So you are a teacher of Gothic history as well. I wanted to ask you, can you share 3 Gothic history facts that you find the most fascinating?
Oh, okay. Um, hmm. I think one of the facts that's interesting me at the moment is the way in which Gothic architecture and Gothic literature hold hands. That
Okay.
the Gothic movement is in itself a broad movement that's literature, it's fashion, it's music at different points in history, it's visual arts. But I'm working on an academic paper right now where I'm looking at Gothic spaces in Edgar Allan Poe, Catriona Ward's The Last House on Needless Street, and Mike Flanagan's adaptation, Fall, the House of Usher, and the way in which they use architecture in a psychological manner. And so I've been kind of looking actually at Gothic architecture, and I rediscovered this little thing called a folly, which is a fake building that people used to put on their estates in England. Like they would build a crumbling castle, or they would build an Egyptian temple or a Greek temple and just put it out there. And it didn't really serve any purpose other than just to be this thing that they put out there. Some kind of like subjective reaction is supposed to be evoked in the viewer. Like it might creep them out and give them chills, or it might make them amused. And I don't know, that's like the biggest architectural or Gothic fact I've been thinking a lot about recently is is Follies. What a weird thing.
Yeah, though that I don't think I was ever aware of that. That's fascinating.
And it's kind of a little, it's, I don't know if it's totally obscure, but it's not a thing that I think is, you see a lot. But once you start digging into it, there's like this whole internet rabbit hole to fall in. So I guess Gothic Follies, I'm very interested in the way in which found manuscripts are used in the Gothic. Like the British always use it as a premise to tell their story. Like, how do you tell a novel? Well, it has to be a diary that's found or some letters that are found. And it kind of gives them also kind of an excuse to morally distance themselves as the author from any shocking material. It's like, I didn't make this up. It's in this novel. I mean, it's in this diary.
Okay.
And then how Americans use it. It's like a different altogether. Found books and letters are always so interesting, I think, in American Gothic. Like in Stephen King's The Shining, Jack gets obsessed with the hotel after finding all these scrapbooks and letters and articles, but King doesn't use it just to tell a story, like as a narrative premise. These texts that he finds actually haunts the character and possesses the character. So ultimately, it's not important what's in those letters or articles, but its effect on Jack. So I guess that's my second one. I don't think I have a third at the moment.
Okay. It sounds like in that example, those texts and everything, they almost become a character unto themselves versus a vehicle in the British narratives.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's like an extension of the house because the Overlook Hotel is already a character. So that's a great way to put it, that they're characters.
I love this idea of the Gothic Follies. Now I want to build a fake crumbling castle on my property just so people wonder.
My husband Andy and we joke about that we're just gonna go in the backyard and like put a Greek temple out there or an Egyptian pyramid or something out in the yard.
Sort of random obelisk.
Right, right.
What's your advice for writers that are struggling to find their voice?
Wow, voice is so tricky. It really is. It's something that I've been trying to help my students with just in regular, English classes. But I would say to anybody struggling to read a lot, not necessarily to imitate, but to be able to recognize voice in other works. And then I would say probably do a lot of your own writing so you can kind of discover your voice. Try not to censor yourself as you write. And I say that because I'm the worst at that. But oftentimes if you give yourself permission for like the messy first, second, or even third draft of something, your voice can come out. You sound like you and no one else when you aren't censoring yourself. But you could always clean it up. I always say you can always edit.
Yeah, sometimes the hardest thing is just to go ahead and get that first draft down, and then once that's down, you can kind of see if the voice is working or not.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Crystal, not only are you a board member for Broadleaf Writers Association, you're also involved with the Horror Writers Association Atlanta chapter. What drew you into those organizations, and how have they helped you as a writer?
Oh gosh, they've helped me so much because most writers we're kind of an introverted lot. And even if you're an extroverted person or you love to socialize, ultimately you've got to sit down and do the work yourself. So it can be very isolating. I think that writing organizations are so helpful to learn from other people, to help you promote your work, to understand that everybody struggles, even people you think are super successful who must be beyond that. It's funny, I'm not exactly sure how I first got involved in the Horror Writers Association in Atlanta. I think what happened was we attended the Horror Writers Association chapter or the national conference, forgot the year. But we didn't have a local chapter in Atlanta or an active local chapter. So some people who were in the Atlanta area and in Georgia got together. I think we met at the conference and made some kind of connection that way, maybe through social media. and ultimately a group of us said, let's establish a chapter in Atlanta. And it's been very successful. And that's the perfect place to have a chapter because there's so many writing groups in Atlanta, but there wasn't an active HWA there. And then some of the people that were in HWA were also in Broadleaf. So the power of networking. And they're like, hey, this is an amazing organization. We love it. We think you love it too. And I was invited to stick a toe in, and then I got invited to be on the board, and it's just been wonderful. And in both organizations, I've made contacts with other writers and had like beta readers or done beta reading. I have a writers group that I'm involved with, two groups actually through HWA, Ladies of the Night, which is female and female identifying horror writers and creatives in the field. And that's been wonderful. And then just my personal, writing group where we share each other's work. It's both have been fantastic organizations. And I tell everybody all the time, you've got to find your tribe.
Mm-hmm. Finding that community support can make all the difference. I know it has for me as well. It's something I've really enjoyed being able to explore and develop within the communities. So, Crystal, where can people find your stories?
Okay, let's see. I've been printed in a few anthologies. So I'm in Generation X, which is edited by Rebecca Rowland. It's about Gen X horror writers writing Gen X horror stories. So I'm in that one. My story, The Shade. I'm also recently in Hard to Find, a collection of new Southern Gothic fiction. And that's where my story, Last Dance with Mary Jane, is in. I'm also in the anthology Georgia Gothic, which was put out in part with a partnership with our HWA chapter in Atlanta. And my story Dream House is in that collection. And that's also the story that's been featured on Pseudopod, the audio drama. So you can see a print version, audio version of that. And there's a couple other places on the internet. I write under C.O. Davidson. So that's how to find me on socials and also how to find my work.
Okay. So are these books that are going to be available at like our local independent bookstores? Is it easier to find them online? How would you recommend people find them?
It's easier to find them online because these are smaller anthologies printed by indie companies. And so I think that it's much easier to find them, but you can find them on bookstore.org. You can find them on Amazon. There's a couple that you could probably order directly from the book website that they've created for those titles.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this Broadleaf Member Spotlight. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I am excited to put all of this out and introduce you to even more people.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it.